I want to talk to you today about Jesus' triumphal entry and some of the ironic things about that triumphal entry today. And in order to do that, we're gonna. Is this TV on? So it doesn't look like it. So it was. Technology. Jesus did not have a television when he went through. So, all right, I think it's that one. All right, there we go. All right, pardon the technical difficulties there. Still have technical difficulties. Okay, now the clicker's not working. Yeah. I can always blame my son-in-law for this, so... All right, thank you. All right. Yay, Shem. Thank you. All right. All right, there we go. What's ironic about Palm Sunday? I remember when I was a kid growing up at Trinity Baptist Church, and I was learning all about the Easter story and stuff for the first time many, many years ago. What I always found to be ironic is the fact that on Palm Sunday, Jesus enters Jerusalem to cheering crowds. I mean, and it is incredible how much he is cheered. And in fact, the Pharisees in John chapter 12, the Pharisees say, look, you're not accomplishing anything. Look, the world has gone after him. You know, and they say, when it says you are not accomplishing anything, they're talking amongst themselves there. And they're basically saying, what are we accomplishing? We're nothing. They're the religious leaders of the day, but the people aren't following them. They're following Jesus. The whole world's after Jesus. They're going after this guy. And so we failed, is what they're saying. That's how it seemed on that Palm Sunday. Jesus is coming in to cheering crowds. Everyone seems to love him. It's all great. And yet just a few days later, Jesus is carrying his cross up to Calvary and is crucified. And many of the same people who had cheered for his triumphal entry were calling for him to be crucified. And many of them had completely abandoned him, including some of his closest followers. And so the irony and how things can turn around that quickly struck me as a kid as I don't understand this. And then when I got older, and you look at how public opinion can be so fluid these days, I began to understand it. When I also began to study about what the expectations are of the people on Jesus, you begin to see how many of his followers turned on him. Expectations is a big deal. And people were expecting and wanting Jesus to do and say some things that he didn't do. And when he didn't come through for them the way they wanted him to, they turned on him. And there's lessons for all of us today on that. And so today we're going to look at, are you a fan or a follower? Are you a fan or a follower? Now, when I first came to the church here 13 years ago, you all know I was a avid football fan. And over the years, my enthusiasm for professional football has cooled considerably, and for a variety of reasons. But among them is I just had to make a decision, is it worth devoting that much of my time and energy to watching a bunch of celebrities play football on the field? Is that really worth it? And I began to not really. And so I've cooled a lot of my enthusiasm for professional football. But at least the Washington football team now has a name. I'm not crazy about it, but at least they have one. And I still have my standards. I'm not going to root for the Dallas Cowboys, okay? I'm not going to go there. So I'm still going to root for Washington, but much more subdued. But I remember growing up as a kid, my grandfather bought me tickets to go to the Washington Redskins game at the time, and we had a blast. Of course, they lost, but that comes with the territory of being a Washington fan. And they had that track record and stuff. But I remember going there and cheering in the stands and being enthusiastic for the team. But there's one thing that did not happen that day. One, they didn't win. But other than that, there's one thing that did not happen. They didn't call, Brian Tubbs, we need you on the field. That didn't happen. I got to stay in the stands, and cheer. And that's the case with a fan. A fan, you basically get to stay where you are. Maybe you'll give some money. Maybe you'll wear the team colors. Maybe you'll cheer loudly. Maybe you'll show some enthusiasm. But as a fan, you get to stay pretty much where you are. You get to pretty much continue to live your life as you see fit. You don't necessarily have to step outside of your comfort zone if you're a fan. But to be a follower, that's different. To be a follower, you have to leave where you are, and you got to go where the person is who you're following. That requires change, requires trust, it requires sacrifice. That's the difference between a fan and a follower. And the question that I want you to be prayerfully asking yourselves today on this Palm Sunday is, are you a fan of Jesus or are you a follower of Jesus? And this question really comes home in a passage we're going to look at today, at a conversation that takes place at the end of Jesus' triumphal entry. So Jesus has come into Jerusalem. With the passage that Marlon read talked about that. So he's come into Jerusalem, and now there's these conversations taking place. And the Gospel of John tells us one of these conversations. In John chapter 12, beginning in verse 20, we read, "Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.'" So just quick setting the stage, these people were in town in Jerusalem. They were not Jewish people, so therefore they were not part of the covenant of Moses and Abraham and all that. They were outside. They were in the Greek culture, and so they could have been from anywhere in the Greco-Roman world. But they came down and they wanted to see Jesus. I don't want to overemphasize this too much, but there's a lot of people even today that have an interest in Jesus, that want to see Jesus, that even sometimes like to talk about Jesus, but they're not necessarily ready to follow Jesus. There is a distinction there. Jesus responds, or Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn Andrew and Philip told Jesus, but Jesus answered them saying, "The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified." This is where it separates. Sometimes we tend to follow other people, particularly in politics or in business or whatever. You will follow certain individuals, but not all those individuals are qualified to be glorified. Jesus alone is qualified to be glorified. And in this case, Jesus is about to be glorified by laying his life down for you and for me. So Jesus says, "I'm about to be glorified." And we're going to spend most of our time on the next couple of verses here. "Most assuredly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain." And we're going to take these next couple of verses one at a time and look at the point that Jesus is making, because this is really, really key for us to understand. If you go to Home Depot, and I don't think anyone here, a member of our church right now, currently owns a farm. If I'm mistaken about that, you can talk to me. But many of you have gardens. But right now, if we're going to do a garden, we go to Home Depot and we buy seeds. And this is what people tell me anyway, because I don't have a garden, okay? But you go and you buy seeds, and you plant those seeds, and then you water them and so forth. But the seed, Jesus is saying, the seed has to essentially die. It has to cease being a seed and become something else. And this is a principle here, because a lot of people aren't willing to go through that transformation. A lot of people aren't willing, and hear me on this, to stop being who they are in order to transform into something else. We're not willing to do that. We want to stay who we are. We want to retain our own purpose and identity. We want to retain us, and we want to tack Jesus on. And there's a lot of churches out there and pastors out there and televangelists out there that are basically calling on people to simply add Jesus to your life. But Jesus is not interested in being added to your life. Jesus is interested in transforming your life. And so you have to be willing to take your life and give it to Jesus so he can make something new. Paul talks about this extensively in his letters, where we have to put aside the old man, the old person, and become a new creation in Jesus Christ. When we give ourselves to the Lord, he takes over, and we become someone new. That is what salvation is all about. That is what discipleship ultimately is about. To die to yourself, and be born again in Jesus. And you will never reach your full potential as one who is created by God unless you die to yourself. Now, there is the initial dying, where what's called justification, where we enter into a relationship with Jesus Christ. But that process then of giving us new life, that process of growing, the seed is planted into the ground and that tree grows, that process is sanctification and it's discipleship, and that takes a lot of time. And it takes commitment on our part. So I don't want to be misunderstood. Salvation is based on the grace of God. And you put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, receiving that gift of salvation, and you're saved. Salvation is not based on your works. I want to be very clear about that. But becoming a true follower of Jesus, that does require some work. That requires surrender. It requires giving up. I failed to bring it in today because I'm a forgetful pastor. But I did bring it in the past, and I'll try to bring it in as a show and tell next week, even though my sermon next week won't have anything to do with it, but I'll have it up here and you can look at it. Anyway, what is that thing I'm talking about? April 9th, we just had April 9th. Yesterday was the anniversary of Robert E. Lee surrendering to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the American Civil War. One of my great-great-grandfathers fought for the North. He was my direct paternal great-great-grandfather, John Tubbs. He fought for a regiment of Pennsylvania Volunteers. Another of my great-great-grandfathers fought for the South, and he rode with the 9th Virginia Cavalry, and his name was Lewis Jones. Just so the kids are clear, I didn't meet either one of these great-great-grandfathers. I'm not that old, okay? I'm getting old, but not that old. Lewis Jones had to sign, this is part of General Grant's terms, had to sign a parole. And this parole was basically that he would no longer take up arms against the United States. So every individual soldier in the Confederate Army, including Lewis Jones, had to sign this document of surrender. We have that today. It's part of our family heirloom that's been passed down. So I have Lewis Jones' parole document. And it is cool. And I have no interest of selling it on eBay or anything. It's going to get passed to my oldest child, Jennifer, when I pass on. And it's something that we just kind of keep into in our family. But that piece of history is cool for a lot of reasons, but it's also cool because it shows what surrender is all about. He had to give up fighting against the Union, had to accept the Union, and had to then proceed as a citizen of the United States. He had to surrender. We as Christians, in order to even enter into that relationship, we have to surrender. We have to surrender. If you look at Saul of Tarsus' conversion on the road to Damascus, Jesus says, it's hard for you, isn't it, to kick against the pricks or the goads, as some translations say. And this is the instruments that farmers back then used to keep their donkeys or their mules or whatever to be walking in a straight line. And so the animal wouldn't be able to turn to one side or the other. It had to surrender to the will of the farmer. And in this case, Jesus was saying, you are fighting the will of God in your life, Saul. And now it's time for you to surrender. And Saul did. Lord, what will you have me to do? He surrendered. And Saul was transformed and became known to us today as Paul, one of the greatest missionaries of all time. But that transformative work began with surrender. And so I want to say right now, one of the things that breaks my heart a lot about our culture right now, and I want you to hear my heart on this, because I'm not being political and I'm not trying not to be, lack compassion here. But if you watch the news, if you watch what's going on in the workplace, if you see what's happening in the world, there's a crisis of identity in our world today. And a crisis of confusion. People are confused about who they are. And they are, in many cases, going to great lengths to try to change their identity in a way that makes them feel validated about what's going on inside their head. And then they want others to accept them accordingly. But what breaks my heart about all this is not from a political standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint, and hear me on this. We are chasing the wind if we look within ourselves for our purpose and our identity. You will never be happy. You will never be fully at peace if you just look within yourself for your identity and your purpose. A really good movie that came out many years ago is with Russell Crowe in it. It was A Beautiful Mind, if you have seen that. And at one point, he's a brilliant mathematician, but he's got major mental health issues going on. And at one point, he's saying to this guy who's trying to help him, he's saying, why can't I figure this out? My mind is strong enough that I can usually figure these things out. How come I can't figure this out? And the guy said, because your problem is in your mind. And the reason why many of us today can't be happy and at peace with ourselves is because the problem is us. The problem is in us. We are made for a relationship with our Creator. And until we surrender to that relationship, we will never be whole. We will never be complete. Your identity is not based on any social demographic characteristic that this world has to offer. Your identity is not even based on your biology or what's going on in your head or your brain. Your identity is based on the fact that you were created by Almighty God. And God sent His Son to die for you. And you have to surrender to that and receive that gift. That needs to be our identity. Especially us as Christians, we should know this. Paul says, you were bought with a price. But in order to experience that vibrant life with God, we must surrender to God. So then Jesus continues that thought. He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. And then Jesus had a way of using language that would get attention. This is called what psychologists call a pattern interrupt. Make a strong statement to get attention, because if you just sometimes if you just make a soft statement or a, statement that doesn't, ruffle any feathers or whatnot, then it just kind of gets lost in the noise and people kind of can tune you out. But you make a strong statement like this, you got to hate your life. Hate your life. That's a strong statement. And that's like, people are like, what? Say what? Now, Jesus is the greatest teacher ever. And so he recognized that in order to really get things across, he's got to make people think. Make people think and reflect on what he says here. So this is a bit of hyperbole here going on. And he's contrasting love and hate. In the biblical sense, hate here does not mean bitterness in the way Jesus is using it, but rather rejection. So he's saying that you must reject your life in this world in favor of your love for me, is what he's saying. Now, there are some that would say, well, it seems like he's saying that I should hate myself. And that's a lot of people have that view. So I want to call your attention to a couple things. Number one, God created you. So for you to hate yourself means that you're hating what God created. And so that is not what God is in favor of. God doesn't want you to hate yourself. Number two, remember the second greatest commandment. The second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. Now, what is the premise under that that's buried in that is that you're going to love yourself. It's sort of a common sense assumption that healthy people are going to value themselves. And what Jesus is saying is that you should value your neighbor just as much as you value yourself. That's what that second greatest commandment is. And it's been my experience in counseling and so forth that people who hate themselves have a hard time loving others. Because if you don't value who you are, then you're not going to value other people. And people who have a lot of self-loathing and a lot of hatred have a real difficult time extending love to others because they don't have any love to extend. That calls our attention to the first great commandment. The number one commandment is love God. And that's really, it all flows out of that. Because if you love your Creator, if you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, then you are going to, as a result of that, have a healthy opinion of yourself because you know that you love the one who made you. And how can you hate yourself if you love the one who made you? And so it kind of flows in a very logical manner. If I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, then I'm going to appreciate the fact that God made me to love him. And I'm going to appreciate the fact that God gives me value and God can give me strength and God gives me purpose. And I'm going to appreciate that. And so I'm going to have a healthier perspective about me. And then I'm going to want to share that love with others. And so I'm going to want to love other people. And so God is calling us to a selfless love. But a selfish love is the toxic kind of love. A selfish love is when you basically care only about yourself and you don't care about others. But what's interesting about a selfish love, and I wish I could do a deep dive on the psychology here, but just bear with me on this, and if you doubt me, go talk to a psychiatrist or a counselor. Go talk to our very own Ronnie White about this, and she'll back me up, I'm sure. She has no idea what I'm about to say, but I'm sure she'll back me up. So, but the idea is this: people who tend to be arrogant or overly proud, or people who tend to just lavish on themselves all kinds of things, deep down really do not like themselves. And they're trying to overcompensate. And they're trying to fill up an emptiness within them. And that's when we get into addictions and all kinds of things. A person with a healthy self-love, and I use that in quotation marks because that's a loaded phrase, self-love. It just sounds bad, I understand. But a healthy self-love is not, I want to elevate myself above other people. That is not a healthy self-love. A healthy self-love is taking seriously who God made you to be. A healthy self-love is valuing the fact that God made you and God has a purpose for you. And that I'm here and God has given me an opportunity to serve him. And so Jesus is not saying hate yourself, but look, he is saying that you should hate or reject your life in this world. And this gets to be where the rubber really meets the road on what we believe. Do you believe honestly, and just answer this quietly in your own heart, but please answer it honestly in your own heart. Do you believe that there is more to this life than what we're experiencing right now? Do you believe that there is such a thing as eternity? And do you believe that God is there? And that this life statistically speaking, is nothing compared to what awaits us in eternity. If you really believe that deep, deep down, then you will have no problem with this. This is why some of the great saints of the Bible were able to suffer. They were able to suffer because they knew there's more to this life than just where I'm inhabiting right now. I've used this illustration before, but I use it again. If Jane and I, let's say the elders and the deacons got together with the stewardship committee and decided to raise my salary to $1 million, okay? All right. And let's say that they gave you all enough intoxicating drugs that you went along with that at a business meeting, okay? And so let's say then that, and there was some rich donor that actually made that possible because we don't have $1 million budget. But anyway, and then let's say Jane and I go out and we just buy a huge mansion, okay? But before we can move into the mansion that we get to live at for the rest of our lives and stuff, we have to stay at Motel 6 for 2 or 3 days. Yeah, they leave the light on. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not making any condemnation of Motel 6, okay? But if we go to Motel 6 and we find, let me just give you a better example. We actually stayed at a motel for a friend's wedding one time. And we did not take our shoes off inside that hotel because the rug was hideous and dirty and filthy. And it's like, there's no way we're walking on that with our bare feet. Ain't happening. The shower nozzle did not exist. There was a hole in the bathroom wall, and water just kind of came out of that hole, okay? All right? This was a terrible, terrible place to stay. And now this is pre-internet, so there was no place to go and leave a Yelp review, okay, or anything like that. But it was just bad. The sheets, I mean, not good. Not good. Jane and I stayed at a hotel recently, and there were ants in the room with us. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like to share my hotel room with ants. I don't like to share any place with ants, okay? And so we've had some experiences over the years of our 30 years of marriage. I had some experiences with some bad hotels or motels occasionally. But if we know that after 2 or 3 days in a bad hotel, we get to move into a beautiful mansion, then how upset are we going to be about the inconvenience of 2 or 3 days in the motel? If we have a healthy perspective, then we're like, okay, we can deal with this because we got the mansion coming. And the mansion has like everything we could want. You know, turn down service with the housekeeping staff. They come in, they decorate the towels and stuff like they used to do on the cruise ships and stuff. And they do the the mint on the pillow, all that stuff. We're looking forward to that. But we got to spend 2 or 3 days of inconvenience here in this hotel. If we have a healthy perspective of life, we'd be okay with that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you understand it's the same thing? Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. Jesus is personally preparing a place for his followers. Paul says in Romans 8 that the sufferings of this world, this life, are not worthy to be compared to the glory that will be revealed in us. And yet, what we do is we get all bent around and upset and twisted around about stuff happening in this life that we take our focus off of the life that Jesus has in store for us. This is why Paul and Silas could be in a prison, in a dungeon, singing praises to God. This is why the great saints listed in Hebrews 11 could be like, what's the worst that can happen to me? I die? Okay. I die. I wake up in glory. I win. I want you to think about that. I'm not saying that the stuff that happens in this life is unimportant. And I'm not saying that you should just kind of blow off things. If you've lost a loved one, you're entitled to your tears. As Queen Elizabeth said, tears are the price of love. But if you've lost a loved one who knows Jesus, then you can be comforted to know that you're going to see your loved one again. And so this is what Jesus is getting at here. So many times what we do is we wrap our arms around the short term and what we have right now, we don't want to let go. This is why Paul says that the soldier does not entangle himself in the affairs of this world. And we need to not entangle ourselves in this world because Jesus has a better one for us. We are pilgrims passing through. While we're here, we are ambassadors for Jesus Christ. And that's our whole purpose. And so don't waste too much time getting all bent out of shape and upset about what's going on in our world today, because all of this world is going to pass away. And don't spend too much time getting upset about stuff that might be happening to you. Or even if you feel like there's some kind of existential crisis you're dealing with inside your head right now. Fact of the matter is, your life in this world will eventually come to an end. And when it does, you step into eternity. Are you ready for that? Because that's where it's going to be longest. To visualize this, imagine that you have two guys in our church. They take a rope, and they just keep walking to each end with the rope, and they never stop. And then you take a little piece of red tape and put it around the rope. That's your life. That's your life compared to a rope that keeps going and going and going around and around the world and never stops. Just a little red piece of tape. That's your life. That's your life in this world. And Jesus says, don't put all your emphasis on that life. Put your emphasis on eternity. Have an eternal perspective in life. It'll get you through this life a whole lot better accordingly. And then Jesus says, if anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. So this is interesting. Again, I talked about if you're a fan, you get to stay in the stands pretty much. Occasionally, sports teams will do cool things for their fans. Maybe you get to come down and get a picture with the team. Maybe you get season tickets or something. Maybe you do something. But still, as a fan, you get to stay in the stands. You don't get to it's not like if let's assume you're a Washington fan and the Commanders start playing and they're like, okay, stop. We need you down the field right now. Fans, come on down. We need your help here. It's not going to happen because you're a fan. And as a fan, there's a bit of a barrier between you and the team. But if you're a follower, that barrier drops. And I want you to see this. Jesus is welcoming us into partnership to be a part of his work. There is no barrier. He says, those who follow me, well, wherever I am, that's where my servants are going to be too. You get to be with Jesus. Now, the consequence of that and the cost of that is sometimes, well, not sometimes, you got to give something up. Now, just as an example of giving something up, if you didn't get a palm branch today, just see Braden Barnett. He'll hook you up at the end of the service, okay? He saw me up here with a palm branch. That wasn't good enough. So he took my palm branch, and he gave me 2. So I have a double portion now, thanks to Braden Barnett. But in a way, that's a symbol of what Jesus does for us. He'll take away your life, but he'll give you a double portion in response. Because not only does he give you a life with him in this world, you get the life with him in the next world too. A double portion. So yeah, you're going to have to give some things up. You're going to have to give things up to be a follower. But what you gain far exceeds what you give up. But I want you to just ask yourself practically, do you follow Jesus? And you can't just say, yeah, I follow Jesus. You need to ask yourself, where is Jesus and where am I? I want you to think right now about where Jesus is in our world. In case you haven't noticed, people aren't getting along right now in our world. I posted something on my Instagram, and I just said, Christians should be kind. I thought that was pretty non-controversial. But that drew an objection. I said, Christians should be kind. And this one person came in and said, Christians are being far too kind and we're being walked on. Even Jesus got mad. That's what she said. So, yes, Jesus got mad. First, you ain't Jesus. I didn't say this to her. I was kind, okay? But you're not Jesus. Neither am I. But I wish I had $1 for every time someone used the excuse, hey, Jesus, he overturned the tables of the money changers, so that's what I'm doing. I'm a table overturner, and I'm doing it in Jesus' name, you know. If I had $1 every time I heard that, I would get that mansion, you know. The reality is that Jesus was quite restrained when he overturned the money changers' tables. Imagine what he could have done to those people. He was quite restrained. The second thing you need to keep in mind is we're talking about one incident, one episode in his life. And think about all the corruption that was taking place in the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus. And if you don't think there was corruption in the Roman Empire, you know nothing about history. I mean, you start studying the lives of the emperors, the Caesars, and all that stuff, and what they did, including Tiberius, who was the Caesar, the emperor at the time of Jesus. Study Tiberius. Just look up Tiberius and look at the stuff that he did. Jesus did not raise an army and attack Rome to overthrow Tiberius. I want you to hear me on this. He didn't do that. Jesus could have led an entire revolution to overthrow Rome, and that's what the people who cheered him on Palm Sunday wanted him to do. But he didn't. And today, I feel like there's this sense in Christian circles that we've got to show strength, and we've got to show power, and we've got to fight. Fight. Paul says, fight the good fight. And what the devil will do is the devil will get us into fighting the wrong fight. And when we fight the wrong fight, we discredit the one that we're supposed to be fighting for. Fight the good fight. And Paul tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in the high places. That is who we're fighting. That's who we're supposed to be fighting. And you may, even today, in this day and age of social justice, some people are going to think, well, why didn't Jesus lead an army and attack Rome? Because what Jesus did accomplished a whole lot more than that. Jesus kept his focus on what he was supposed to be doing. And we aren't doing that. If you want the United States of America, I'll speak in an American context, if you want the United States of America to become sane again and moral again, at least moral quotation marks, the United States has never really been completely sold out to God. Let's be honest about that, okay? And there's always been immoral aspects about our country, always. But if you want the United States to be sane and moral, and you want to see a decline in this lasciviousness and evil that's taking place in our society, if that's what you want, the best way to do it is on your knees in prayer to God to make sure that we as Christians are doing our own part, that we are, as it says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. God's people need to be doing their part before we can ask the world to do its part. And then we need to start evangelizing people and winning people to Jesus Christ. And the more people in America who become followers of Jesus, the better off our country will be. And the better off our world will be. That's the fight we got to fight. That's the fight. So where are you in relation to where Jesus is? And if you're following worldly voices as opposed to following Jesus, then you're following the wrong shepherd. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. James says, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and he will lift you up. One of the cool stories in the Bible is a guy named Elijah. And when we meet Elijah, we see he's introduced as Elijah the Tishbite. That's all he's introduced as. Now, I'm not going to go through the story of Elijah because we don't have time. I'm going to wrap this up quickly. But if you studied Elijah, you would know Elijah would not appear on GQ magazine's cover. Elijah would probably not pass many job interviews for being a pastor of a church today because he didn't quite have the image, let's just say, of a pastor. He had an interesting dietary style, approach, interesting dress and everything. But Elijah had passion for God. But what's interesting is Elijah is introduced as the Tishbite. He's not introduced as the son of anyone. And that was unusual for a Jewish culture that prized family. Normally, it'd be me, Brian, son of Edward. You'd be introduced based on your family, and there was honor in your family, or at least there's supposed to be. But there's indications that Elijah did not have an honorable family background. And in fact, at one point, he gets really discouraged, and he says, take me, Lord, kill me. I am no better than my fathers. He was at the lowest point of depression. I'm no better than my fathers. And yet, what does the Lord do? Well, the Lord then rescues him, continues to use him, introduces him to his new protege, Elisha. So now Elijah has a companion, a friend, because Elijah was very lonely. But no longer. Now he's got a buddy, a friend, a partner in ministry, and someone that he can train. Not only that, but God gives him an entire school of prophets. People begin to come to Elijah and Elisha. They want to be trained to serve the Lord too. And now God is giving Elijah the blessing of seeing the fruit of his ministry. And now these people are coming in, and now Elijah gets to train and coach and help other men who are being raised up as prophets in Israel. A great honor, but it doesn't stop there. Then, when Elijah and Elisha are out taking a walk one time, God sends a chariot of fire. A chariot of fire to take Elijah to heaven. None of Elijah's fathers had that honor. When I read that recently in that context, it hit me and choked me up. God knows your deepest needs. God knows your deepest pain. God knows your deepest insecurity. If you will surrender yourself to him and follow him, he will meet you where you are. And he will lift you up in ways that you cannot possibly lift yourself up. You've got to trust him. You've got to surrender to him. And you have got to just depend on him for everything. Because he is our everything. Nothing is more important than your relationship with God. Surrender to God. Let him build you up and lift you up. Let him give you purpose. And let him give you peace. Would you join me in prayer, please? Father, I pray that today, I know that there's some things that some people are holding on to, some things, anxieties they're dealing with, some things that are maybe changing in their lives. Father, I know that there's pain in our congregation right now, and I know I myself am not immune to that. I've experienced my own things, as you know, and so, Father, I just ask that you help us to just focus on you. Your servant Isaiah said that you will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. Lord, I pray that we will just keep our eyes focused on you and surrender to you and let you do the changes that are taking place in our life. Let you do the work in us. Let you surrender, release ourselves to you and trust you so that we can become the people that you want us to be. May we not be a seed that refuses to be planted. May we be a seed that is transformed into a tree that bears great fruit for you. That is our purpose. And on this Palm Sunday, I pray that we will not just be like the fans cheering Jesus when he came in and then turning on him when he didn't do what they wanted. May we instead be followers who know that in the end Jesus will triumph and that he is ultimately the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And that wherever he goes, that's where we'll go to. So, Father, I just ask all this in your Son's holy and very precious name. Amen.